looking at this title slide, and I'm wondering why Clint has so many letters in his name. Can't keep it short.
He likes to maximize brand density.
Captures the eye.
Captures the eye.
If I'd have done it, my version of my font would have been about 2 or 3 points bigger.
That's a good idea.
Oh no, so now we're going to have a triangle descending from left to right next time.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us again for another episode of SEO Fight Club. This week, we're going to be looking at the causes of description variance. And what we mean by that is when Google is split testing different summary text in the search results that you see in Google. And so Google will pull those summaries from different parts of the page, most historically the meta description, but Google now rewrites that text with schema information, and if they don't like your meta description, they pull it from elsewhere. And so we want to look at the variance that we see going on there. We don't have Carolyn with us today. She'll be back next week. But she's going to do a whole second season of her show, so that's great news. Be sure to check it out if you haven't already. You can Google it by name. And so, Clint, what's the word on SEO this week?
Yeah, we're back. The Monday was the first show. I think it went pretty good. We'll see how the reactions are. I don't have a whole lot of commenting viewers, so we'll see how that goes and how they like the new format. But it's news with testing, with it's also kind of a over the shoulder of building out this news site, doing the SEO and all that stuff all wrapped into one. So
now,
it's a
are
fun
the
project.
videos gonna be on the website?
They are. So right now the news is on top, so the breaking news section, and then below it it's featured stories, and featured stories is where all the videos are going to go.
I think you should have the latest video, or maybe a carousel of the recent videos on all the news stories. That way every page is promoting the show.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll see how that one works.
I really love the news side of what you're doing. Like it gives me chills. It's such a cool idea. And so if you haven't seen what he's doing, he's basically going nose to nose with the other SEO news sites. Now it's a very lofty goal, because thousands of SEOs have attempted this, and we all know how those attempts ended. It's very hard to do daily news.
Yep.
It's a ton of work. The crazy thing about it is when you look at other SEO news sources, they tend to be like, a lot of shills and yes men and people who aren't necessarily great at SEO. Like even Barry Schwartz admits that he's not in SEO. He doesn't practice SEO. And these are the people that are doing SEO news. And so having someone like Clint doing SEO news is amazing, because not only is he in the trenches and doing SEO, he is also very up to date on the body of work that is SEO testing. And he can pull the relevant stories and put all that experience into the stories. That is like a super weapon for SEO news. That's the thing I have been wanting my whole damn career since day one. And it is so important to get SEO news from talented SEOs. And so I strongly recommend that every SEO everywhere support this initiative. It's SEO this week. Tell Clint how you feel about what he's doing. Give him leads on hot stories. Link to his website. Promote it in your groups. We, as an industry, need this. We need it, and Clint is willing to try. So, I get chills about this project, and I want it to succeed. It is so cool. So I'll stop embarrassing Clint at this point.
I was just going to say, you don't have an appreciation for what you're doing until you hear it for someone else. And then 2, you don't appreciate what other people are doing until you try to replicate it. And Barry, I mean, that guy is a machine, because I've only dedicated myself to writing 1 article a day. And then that guy puts out like 2 or 3 or 4. I mean, today he's done like 6. So hats off to him. Hopefully it works out. Hopefully we can share some of that space and provide some value where it is otherwise lacking.
So yeah, I love this project idea. So I'm behind you. I'm gonna promote this pretty heavily, and whatever I can do to help. So on to our topic. Description variance. This is part of the output from the SEO volatility tool. It shows you when various websites for a keyword have different summary text. And so we can see the average ranking that the summary text is appearing at, and the appearance rate, how common is each summary text. And then we have the raw data over here, where the X's are searches that description didn't appear for. So it was, 9 were this one, but on number 6, it was the other one. So we did 10 samples. And so we can see that in some cases, there's a lot of volatility in rank position. So number 4 to number 6, if you're number 4, dropping to number 6 is a pretty painful drop. Likewise, this one, number 4 to number 10, that's a painful drop. 6 to 5, not so painful. Some of these are kind of negligible, but some could be very impactful. And so if this is something that you can fix, it's worth fixing. You can gain 2 spots if you can figure this out. And if this one always appears at number 4 and your baseline of the other one is always at 6 or 7, well, then maybe you should be more like the number 4 and see if you can't move up. And so I want to understand what's happening in these. Why are we getting this variance? What's causing it, and what can we do about it? And so I find this, a really interesting aspect of modern SEO, because we're still only beginning to understand Google's volatility. And clearly, this is a piece in that puzzle. What do you think, Lee?
Yeah, since you put out the volatility tool, I mean, a lot of these sort of things pop up, and you see certain things in the data, but then it changes over time, and it really is a puzzle that needs unraveling because of the impact that it could have on ranking. So I'm with you 100% on this.
Any thoughts about the topic, Clint?
No, I like it because there's tons of questions. Not only why are they changing them, where are they getting it from, and then who programmed the worst machine learning tool ever to create some of these descriptions, and why they thought that was a good idea.
And the first shot is fired across the bow.
Yeah, so with that, let's take a closer look. So the first thing I decided to do was to kind of categorize types of meta description outcomes. And I came across this list. And so this is kind of where I'm starting from in my analysis. So the first one is the web page has a meta description and Google used it for the summary text. And so that's the dream, where what you author gets used because that's how you CRO your search result. The next one is the page has a meta description and Google just flat out ignored it, went for something else. And then there's this new common popular thing that all the hipsters are doing where they say, you know, the page has no meta description, and obviously Google used something else. And then there's this hybrid case where Google is torn between the meta description as written and other captions that appear to be, you know, equally scored or equally relevant. And so Google is like, I'm not sure which one is best. And then there's Google is torn between a new meta description and an old one. So a page update occurred and Google's in transition. And so it took me a while to realize that there's a baseline percentage of just, oh, the page got updated. And the good news about those is they're temporary. So until those updates fully propagate, then you see them in conflict, but a few days later they resolve. And then there's a very rare case, and we've seen it on past shows, where occasionally a search result had no summary at all. But that's the most rare case, but it does exist in nature. Any thoughts on these? Are there any additional ones?
You know, I think you can always break them down further, but I like where this is headed because I think what you're going to do next is, you know, summarize some data based on these categories, and we'll get to see, you know, sort of what's going on at a high level, and that'll provide a foundation for, you know, subsequent analyses.
Yeah, and I go further to say I'm not to the point where I'm going to pool statistics into these groupings, but I'm at least going to look at examples and see if it makes sense to classify them this way. Because, yeah, even for this analysis, we're at the very early stages of understanding it, but this kind of frames how I'm thinking. And so I looked at the search term SEO software, and I looked at the pages that appeared in the report that had description variance, and I put them into which bucket they were in. And I was shocked because 100% of them on one keyword report, so sample problem, but 100% of them on that one keyword report were cases where they had a meta description and Google ignored it. And I was shocked by that. How does that make you feel, Lee?
I want to know if there's a data error, because you usually don't see 100% in one category. But yeah, it is a shocking finding.
And yeah, so it was weird. So I wanted to look at it in a different way. So these were of the ones that were in the report that had the variance. So there's a lot of room for problems in that particular set. So I went with top ranking pages. So let's just start at number 1 and work our way down and put them into categories. And there were a couple exceptions. So there were people that live the dream. It's just not the majority of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay, yeah, because I live the dream. I do it on my website. Whenever I see Google not using the meta description I want, I'm adapting what I'm doing in the meta description so I win it. But most people aren't doing that. but it is possible. Some people can do it. And so, what makes that difference? How do you gain control in a case where most people have no control? So I looked at the success stories, and I was just, trying to see, for the keyword SEO software, what's going on there. They have SEOs, they have SEO related entities, tools is similar to software. SEO marketing is related to SEO, link building, content marketing, all related to SEO. So it seems to me like there's, variation matches as well as related entities. This one as well, the other success story, they had an exact match. They had a brand, keyword SEO, tools again, SEO advice, top rankings, Google search. So a lot of related entities. Those are kind of the things that popped out at me in those success stories. It was variations, entities, and a pretty fair amount, a decent amount of relevancy. But we need a bit more data than just the two success stories. So next, I want to look at the failure cases. And so here's G2. It was a failure case, and they had top SEO software, choose the right SEO software using real-time, up-to-date product reviews from 9,207 verified user reviews. And so Google ignored this. And, they had the variations, but it seems like they were lacking in all of those related entities, which probably impacted their relevancy. When I look at the sentence that Google picked out of their content, they went for search engine optimization SEO software for organic search marketing related entity software variation designed to improve the ranking related entity of websites related entity of search engine results related entity. And would you guys, do you have a different take on what might be the difference?
When you originally started, I was thinking variations, but now that you're pointing out the entities, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? So
yeah, I'm with Clint on that one, because what we originally seen with some of the early data that came out of the volatility tool was, oh yeah, what they're doing is they're picking out variant, passages which have more variations in it. And of course it's more relevant if you got more variations, but here they're going beyond that to include, the related entities, which is like, I'm with Clint. Now that you're looking at it, it's like almost obvious. We haven't seen the rest of the cases here, but I'm assuming they follow the same pattern.
Yeah, and keep in mind there's overlap. The variations are often related entities.
Mm-hmm.
So there could be natural cases of more variations works better because those variations are related entities and more entities is the thing. That's entirely possible. So here's another failure case. We asked some SEO experts to share what they thought the best SEO tools were to boost organic ranking. Their answers may surprise you. So we had variation, variation entity, entity. So, two entities, two variations. And then down here, we reached out to over 30 SEO experts. Is this the same? No, it's different. To find out the best SEO software, so exact match. Keyword tracking tools, so that might be another entity. Impressing the experts. So here it looks like there are 3 variations instead of 2, and possibly 1 or 2 entities as well. So, maybe a score of 5 versus a score of 4. So very close. I look at this and say, oh, there's slim pickings for Google's AI, but a little bit of relevancy tuning could probably win this. So this one to me seems like it's a very close competition on how weak the content is tuned. But, I'm just guessing at that. So here's another one. SEO tools will make your life much easier, Moz. So variant, entity, entity. So here we have variant, 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 entity, 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 entity. So this one makes a good case for the entities. It makes a lot of sense why Google ignored this one.
I mean, even from a machine learning perspective, the machine learning garbage one is better than the original one. So that was a good change.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this would be a case where you could, almost, completely take this, just clean it up, make it a bit easier to read, and probably do better. PC Magazine, want to succeed at digital marketing? Then make your websites rank at the top of customers' searches. We test popular search engine optimization SEO players that'll help you keep your site at the top of the Google heap. All right, that is
a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely word spaghetti. So they could definitely do a better job of communication here. But with that, entity, 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 variation, entity, entity. So not too bad, but I've always had this underlying fear of different punctuation, especially in hot zones of SEO. And so I wonder if the over encoding of the apostrophe is an issue. It might not be, but I worry about parens and things, because I've seen it in my ecom days when you name products, and we had a product team that would be naming scarves, and they'd be silk scarf, quote, majestic sunrise, end quote. And that would be the product name. And all the products that had that punctuation in their name, they would get de-indexed at times. And so when we started removing the unnecessary punctuation, then they started ranking better. And I don't know if that's still true today. That was from years ago. But it ingrained in me this sense of be careful with punctuation. And I wonder if, having too much complex punctuation in a description is risky. So that's what comes to mind there, but I'm not necessarily saying this is proof of that, but it triggers those memories. Industry standard for SEO management, so variation and related entity, 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 entity. So, this scores better. Still a lot of punctuation in there. But yeah, this one, is harder to read, but definitely makes me concerned about how they're tuning. Any thoughts on this one? All right. Let's take a look at this one. Okay, so what we're seeing here is now I'm I'm kind of done looking at those categories. I'm kind of looking at how the descriptions are varying. What types of different ways do they vary? And so in this case, I'm noticing, oh, there's this publish date thing where in this case, it's exactly the same summary, but it got a minute older. And Google is competing between the two because it has different memory. And so this one, I assume, goes away. So if you have a website that updates every few minutes and Google is visiting it every few minutes and looking for changes and detects a change, then says, oh, this updated 49 minutes ago. Then it'll eventually get to, oh, it updated 4 hours ago, and it'll be volatile every hour. Then it'll say it updated 2 days ago, and it'll be volatile daily. Then it'll say it updated, 4 weeks ago. And so you can see how the volatility on these publish date ones should get better with time. But when you have an update, you can plan on having volatility in your rankings as a result.
I question whether that's actually an update and just not the Google News, because you have a Google News feed, the publisher feed, and it has the published date and time. And I don't know that that's an update rather than Google actually matching the time when it's published versus the time that you're searching now.
Well, keep in mind that all of these were conducted in under a minute.
Right.
And so we're seeing both in under that minute. And it could come from a feed. It could come from schema on the page.
But you could have started that. Let's say it takes a minute to do it. You could have started it at 30 seconds, 49 minutes and 39 seconds ago. And then the next half of the set there started after the 50-minute mark. So,
well, I would argue that 49 minutes ago, something happened and Google picked up this new timestamp. So whatever the event was, it was 49 minutes ago. And as it ages, we're getting different summaries based on the age windowing. And so here we have minute windowing, but later you'll get hour windowing, which is less volatility over time. And then you'll get daily windowing and then weekly windowing and so on. So the volatility from this publish date schema should get better as this page ages. Now down here,
I think it'll get worse because the time is going by more and it's freshness. And you can kind of watch that it's 49 minutes ago, then it disappears from the search results. 50 minutes ago, it shows up in the search results. 54 minutes ago, 2 times, 56 minutes ago, or 55 minutes ago, a whole bunch of times, and then 56 minutes ago, 2 times. It's a progression of freshness.
Yeah, I mean, that could be.
I don't think it's an update on the website itself. I think that's Google doing it.
Well, I think there's both. So I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying there's a case, because here's a case on a page where they just pushed the date. They pushed the publish date forward. And so it didn't go to, 3 minutes ago. It's, somebody was playing publish date bumping.
Right, but that's a different instance than what you're showing there.
Yeah, but it causes the description variance.
Right.
And it's still using that same schema field for the publish date. It's just these ones have the luxury of Google coming back frequently looking for changes, and this one didn't. This one, they bumped the page and Google eventually picked up the change.
I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes proving you wrong.
But it's interesting that this is a source. This is a cause of description variance. And potentially this one is a very hard one to mitigate. like obviously in this case, you can mitigate just by being honest with your publish dates, but these ones are, you have to live with until they get old enough. And, the end state might not be the optimal state. Another schema that comes into play is aggregate rating. Oh, went too far. So this one is merely a change in vote count. So as votes came in, Google started testing the two different summaries it had in memory. And this is really interesting to me because Google remembers when. And we've had cases in the past where we've seen Google competing between two different meta descriptions a day apart 4 years ago. So Google has a very long memory for these types of things. And so I thought it was interesting that you can trigger this volatility with your aggregate rating if it's being included. And one of the things you could do is make sure that your aggregate rating, if it's in like a microdata or micro format implementation, you can put it within a no snippet div. And then it should be excluded if you wanted to pull it out. But if you're doing the aggregate rating in JSON LD, I don't know that you can no snippet JSON LD. So that one, you know, depending upon the implementation, you might not have an ability to influence. And I'm not entirely sold that microdata and micro formats with no snippet would solve this, because if Google processes schema out of band with everything else, no snippa might not apply to schema at all. So we need testing in that to even verify that would work. Any thoughts on this one, Clint? You're kind of our resident schema expert.
I mean, that's probably just updated manually or based off of some kind of code where they've correlated their sources to create those votes. I don't know why Google would test going back and just changing that number, you know what I mean, a long period of time. So I would probably argue that that one might have been just as a recent change, and because of just how that's just happened to be, you just kind of caught it in this very at a time we created that volatility.
So just an update propagation that'll resolve in a day or so.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for, propagation.
Pricing. So these are price schema, and they're appearing in the result post ellipsis, which I find interesting, because oftentimes Google will put schema at the beginning, and I find it interesting that it's at the end.
Yeah. There's another variation of that too, where they're actually, you have your price 157.95, and it says average price 149 right next to it.
Yeah, that's part of the offer, because sometimes the price can change by material or size.
No, they're pulling the averages off of the market and putting that in yours. So they're saying, look, your price is 157, but you could probably get it somewhere else for 149.
Eek, I'd be pissed off about that.
Yeah, I've seen that. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's unkind to an online retailer to play that game with their traffic and their content. But yeah, so you can cause this with this, and again, makes me wonder if this could be, if it works, that you could no snippet micro format and microdata schema. This might be a strong argument for using those legacy schema formats to be able to control what's going on. Because, if this information isn't helping you convert, and sometimes it doesn't, sometimes you don't have the best price for the product, but what you have is something that's potentially even more compelling, like a free shipping promotion. You don't want to have the price in there. You want to have, free shipping today only, or free shipping this week, because that would be the thing that would win the click. Like if you're selling exercise equipment, which generally, you don't have to have the best price on, especially if you have discounted shipping, because shipping's going to kill you on heavy, big boxes, then the free shipping promo would be better. So, I could see situations where you would want to suppress the price schema in favor of other promotional text. And so, yeah, I wonder if there's a way to control that. Now, this one is kind of an oddball. This is where there are lists of things or tables of things on the page, and Google has picked up on those, and they're quoting part of the list, and they give you a link to view the full list. And it's so interesting that Google is testing with and without the view full list link. And so, yeah, that one,
were you able to see where that goes?
I didn't investigate it closely. This one was for Bluetooth Xbox wireless headsets.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this a lot in keywords that pull up review sites. So if you're trying to reproduce this result, try keywords that have lots of, list style review articles.
And the reason I asked is because the top best of products, top products listing snippets that they have now, all of those links go to Google search results. There's like minimal linking back to the sites where they get the content from. And they're essentially using the review site's content to populate the featured snippet. They will provide a link, but it's not anywhere near the highest CTR location. And the high CTR points actually go back to Google search results. So I wonder if that's what that does.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. It depresses me. It doesn't surprise me. And my understanding of this feature is it expands the list. So Google is showing n entries in the list, and you click it and expands it to n plus 20 or something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that can cause this type of description volatility in your rankings.
What was the keyword for that Xbox wireless headset?
Yeah, I believe it was Bluetooth Xbox wireless headsets. Yeah, another source is the number of products. So having these being in the selected text. And so what you're seeing is on one day they had, 14,328 products in this category. And then some of those sold out the next day, and they had 14,211. Same thing down here. One day they had 234, and then they had 4 more come back in stock. And so now they have 238, or whichever one is newer versus older. But yeah, you have to be careful with that pagination schema and pagination text, because if Google includes it in the summary text they're picking, it can cause this type of volatility. And so there might be a case to make sure that your pagination text, if you don't want it in the summary, has no snippet around it. And if you don't want it in the summary as well, there might be a case for taking it out of the schema. This presentation, I believe, is Pagination schema. This presentation is Google pulling a block of text off the page. And so that's all I had prepared on this, but what do you guys think about all of this? Like, does it feel like there's smoke that needs more investigation, or does it feel kind of basic, common sense?
I want to go a little bit deeper and test the theory that adding more entities might make that stick better. And if you do that with your meta description, you add more entities and you can kind of almost drive that they'll use your actual one that you pick versus randomly pulling ones. I'm going to test that out.
Yeah, in the last round of Lee's SEO course, I had a couple instances where I had caused description variance on my own website I was trying to rank. And in those cases, tuning the description for relevance corrected the problem usually within hours.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing when Google's in good operating condition, you could probably test this very quickly.
Yep.
That one of the things that just struck me in a lot of the examples that you presented was the institutional memory for prior descriptions, because we've seen in other shows the descriptions that were 3 years old, that sort of thing, versus 2 years old. And so you have to wonder whether it's the institutional memory or what we're seeing as propagation, or a combination of the two, and how that might impact you. How many times do you have to change your description so that you erase the institutional memory of descriptions you don't want them using or testing?
Yeah,
so
there were some leaks out of Gary Ilyas. How do you pronounce his last name? Do you guys know?
Ilyas.
Sorry, Gary, I didn't mean to butcher your name. I doubt he's listening, but just in case.
Gary I is how I refer to him. It's just easier that way.
yeah. That's how I've been doing it, but it's it's not okay to get that wrong all the time. I should get it right. He had a leak in an off the record podcast where he talked about Google's use of protocol buffers. And protocol buffers are a technology that Google integrated for encapsulating serializable data. And so the way it kind of works is that Google sends Googlebot to your web page, and they kind of parse the page and they put that information into a protocol buffer. That protocol buffer is kind of like a URL's permanent record. It's like the permanent record you had in high school, and it goes with you throughout your academic journey from high school onward. So once Google has your URL converted into a protocol buffer, it's kind of the permanent record for that URL. And then Google stops using your web page from that point in the process. Everything else that happens with the link graph and the indexing and the rankings and the presentation of your website in the search results, they're not using your page for that. They're using these protocol buffers. And he talked about the types of things that they were putting into these protocol buffers in that podcast. And he mentioned that, we put the headings in there and important text, and we put all the data about your rankings and your page rank and, all this other information. And he rattled off, a half dozen things that they put into these protocol buffers. And So I'm thinking that this long memory occurs within those protocol buffers. So maybe they have the last 10 summary snippets they used, and they can pick and choose from those last 10. And if some of those last 10 are 4 years old, they still stand a chance to be the most relevant and get selected. If the last two they used were one day apart from 4 years ago and they're still closely scored, maybe they flip-flop with those for 4 years. There's another leak related to those protocol buffers where Martin Splitt talked about comparable fingerprints, and he made the claim that Google can compare any two URLs and know exactly how different or similar they are. And that's a really impressive capability to take two URLs and to say, this one is 2% similar to that one versus this one is 87% similar to that one, and to be able to instantly know that information. I believe that it's doable. And the way that I would engineer it is I would have a term frequency data set inside of a protocol buffer, and then any two URLs would be comparable in that way. So it lended support to protocol buffers because that's totally a capability you could do with that type of technology. And so, yeah, a lot of what we're seeing in the presentation in this type of feature is probably what's being stored in those protocol buffers. We probably have a window into how they're using that technology. Can I prove that? No, but there's at least a theory. We have Google admitting they use this technology and in this kind of way. And if everything, post Googlebot is protocol buffers, then all this stuff is probably in that framework. Let's see, we have a couple questions here. Do you think topical authority makes a difference, a big difference? I do. And I think the unit of measurement for topical authority that Google is using is entities. Collections of entities form topics. So, the follow-up question to that question is, what is the fundamental unit of topical authority? And my guess would be entities. What do you think, Lee?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable interpretation. I think if Google is trying to show, and I'm air quoting, the most relevant description, they're probably picking the one that has the most variance and entities that they can find on the page, and that's kind of what it looks like in some of the data that you're presenting. So I'm with Clint on this. I'm going to go do some testing on descriptions with varying levels of variance and entities, and then see what happens.
Let's see, we have another comment here saying some very tentative anecdata, which I assume means anecdotal data. On pages without headings, I noticed it was more likely that P tag text directly after an HR tag ended up in the description. Any experience with that? It might be that certain tags are boundary conditions for phrase matching. So maybe an HR is considered an end of phrase type thing. And so I could imagine that if that were the case, that would have that type of effect. I haven't actually looked for those boundary conditions on phrases. I'm sure they exist, but I just, so many hours in a day, I've never tested what causes phrase boundary conditions. So I'd say it's plausible, but untested. What do you think, Clint?
Yeah, W3 school says it's a thematic break. So you write your content and you use HR tag, and then you have your next period talking about a new theme, and then you do HR again when you go to a new theme. So it's actually an interesting idea. I save that. I'm gonna test it.
There you go. You spawned a test out of Clint, which is no small feat. Any final thoughts?
No, I thought it was it was cool. You know, this is one of those episodes where you raise a lot of questions. There's not a lot of answers at this time, but at least it kind of points us in directions where we might go hunt for the answers.
Yeah. There's still a lot we don't know about volatility, and we're probably going to spend, the bulk of this year studying Google's volatility. And we did that last year, and we made amazing leaps and bounds to not only understanding, that it's there and its impact on SEO and how can we measure it, how can we fix it. We're to a point where we're actually implementing systems to account for it and to tune it out of our analysis. And so, yeah, I'd expect us to continue studying volatility, going forward. It's such a big part of SEO, and it's been neglected for 20 years. So, yeah, we're going to learn a lot this year. All right. With that, thanks for joining us.